It's me, what a fuss. Okay, okay, I'm letting you out. Were you impatient? Your sister was eating. Here. There you go, let's feed that. And food up there if you need it. Right, let's get these cameras sorted then. This madam wouldn't let me. I think that looks okay for the reading camera. You might not catch everything, unfortunately, because all the floor space is hard to cover. I need to get these cameras in fixed positions so that it's easier to give you proper coverage. I think that's reasonably good, isn't it? Okay. Where are you, little monsters? Take my phones over here. And I need the treat stuff, don't I, so that I can be treating the little lady when she's nice to me. Oh. My secret stash. No one's underneath me, are they? Hey. Have I got the right mics on? Yeah. I don't know if Mad Dog's watching or not, but do you want to maybe change the music or turn the music off? And these guys might get runny aroundy for a bit, but let's see if, as I'm reading the book, they'll come and settle on me eventually. Hello. How are you? Good girl, be gentle. Good girl. Let's give her a treat. Good girl, come here. You're such a good girl. Hello. Do you want some treat too? Here. Here. Good girls. Okay. So this reading, by the way, welcome to everybody who's come from Fantasticon. I hope you had an amazing time, and you heard from all your favourite sci-fi fantastic authors and friends. Yes, be nice. And this morning they played a reading that I did last night when the kits were settled after we played with them. And they did a reading, I did a reading, and it was played out this morning, and it was the first chapter of my book, my my young adult fiction, which is called A Bookkeeper's Guide to Practical Sorcery. And it tells the tale of our story Henry so far in chapter 1. Henry basically, he's always dreamt of being a wizard, and he's unfortunately, because his father went missing a few years ago, he had to become, at the age of 14, the head of the household, and be the money earner. So he went to work in the vaults counting the king's gold as an accountant, and that was where we left him, basically just feeling miserable as he walked home from work, or walks away from work, just feeling absolutely miserable with his lot in life and how he wanted to be a wizard, but he can't. He's got to be an accountant. Chapter 2. The day outside was calm and hazy. The fields and woodlands surrounding Terratonia seemed to be dozing the afternoon away, while in contrast, clusters of cottonwood swirls busy trailed across the lazy terrain. As Henry left the confines of the castle, he pulled the soft leather wages pouch out of his pocket and tossed it up and down, frowning. 5 shekels light again. Mr. Colloyd had waved him off with a look that seemed delighted to point out the subject was not open for discussion. He sighed as he clumped along the road towards the market, kicking at any unfortunate small rocks that happened to lie in his path. The sun beat merrily down on his back, but Henry was too busy stewing over the deducted coins to pay it any heed. "Oh, what's the point?" he asked a solitary cloud despondently. "I'm going to be stuck in that dungeon for the rest of my life." The cloud replied by passing in front of the sun, spilling a miserable-looking shadow across the path Henry's feet were trudging. He aimed a vicious kick at another small rock, only to discover it was part of a much larger rock that had buried itself deep in the surface of the road, presumably to wreak vengeance for all the genuinely small rocks now scattered left and right. "Ouch!" Henry hopped about on the spot, clutching his stubbed toe. His face was pink and cross. "Oh, that's typical. Here's a man when he's down, why don't you?" he accused the world. The world offered up no reasonable explanation for its behaviour, so Henry turned his back on it and carried along his gloomy way. What was he going to do? He couldn't imagine the rest of his life being this dull. He could remember when he was 7 years old, walking home along this very track with his mother after picnicking in the sun-drenched meadows behind the castle. She was so happy back then, full of life and radiance. He'd chatted away about his dreams of magic and what Halcyon had shown him in the castle that week. She'd laughed and ruffled his hair, stopping for a moment to fuss at the twins in the trolley she'd been pulling. They'd only been a few weeks old then and were just 2 gurgling balls of pink flesh. "And what would you do if you met an ugly old witch?" She'd turned from the babies and raised a playful eyebrow at her older son. Dropping slowly into a hunch, her face contorting and her hands rising towards him like claws, she said, "One that wanted to cast a horrible spell on you." Her voice was contorting too, into something scratchy and ugly. Henry remembered feeling the thrill of danger rise in his stomach as she advanced towards him with menace. "Mum, stop it," he'd giggled, unable to resist the urge to step back. "A spell like the curse of the everlasting tickle!" Henry screamed gleefully as she leapt upon him with tickling fingers, tucking himself down into a tight ball in an attempt to keep them from their targets. "Mum, stop!" Henry could hardly get the words out as giggles racked his body and he squirmed beneath his mother's searching fingers, seeking out those tickle zones that are so powerful it's a good job only mothers know where they are. She'd stood laughing and admiring her handiwork. "Some wizard you'd make," she teased as Henry recovered on the dusty old track. "Some wizard indeed," the older Henry said sadly to the memory. The road narrowed as it headed down into town, and the rough surface littered with deceitful little rocks reformed into a smoothly cobbled street. Row upon row of friendly-looking cottages lined up to greet the miserable accountant, their neat little gardens festooned with all the happy, bright colours of summer. Henry faked a cheery smile and waved at a spotless window through which Mrs. Flibbertigibbet, the town gossip and, unfortunately, Henry's aunt, could be seen scrubbing away at some dirty dishes. She regarded him with suspicious contempt, a look she'd developed specially for her nephew, and then turned her attention back to the sudsy sinkload. Yeah, you ugly old bat," Henry muttered through the clenched teeth of his unconvincing smile. "Love you too, Auntie Giblets." The woman in the window snapped her head up as if she'd heard him with perfect clarity. Her cold, grey eyes levelled on Henry, who blushed hotly, waved again, and then became terribly interested in his shoes. Mrs. Flibbertigibbet was Henry's father's sister. She was slim and fine-boned, much like Henry and his father, with a pointed, nosy-looking face and sharp eyes that never missed a trick. Her home was small and neat, strategically situated on the corner of the square to allow for optimum views of anything that might be going on. Regimented rows of floral plumage marched along the entire face of the cottage in brightly painted window boxes, breaking up the party only briefly to allow the front door to do its thing. Image was everything to Mrs. Flibbertigibbet. It was terribly important to her what people thought, but it was even more important that they understood what she thought. And she had a thought on practically any subject you'd cared to mention, regardless of whether or not you actually cared to mention it. She doted on her younger brother and had never liked Henry or his mother. By the time the twins came along, he didn't even think she'd bothered to notice them. It was perhaps the one thing he wished he could learn from the miserable old goose. When she'd heard Henry was going to start work in the vaults to keep a roof over their heads after his father went missing, she'd wafted the idea away as if it were a bad smell, barking a laugh of cruel disbelief. He's 14, for goodness sake, and he's Henry. She'd squeezed his name out of her mouth like she didn't like the taste of it. I give him a week before he's back hiding behind your aprons. Henry bristled at the memory. Ironically, she'd probably done him a favour, as it was a determination to prove her wrong that had helped him get through that first difficult few months at work. He was a full year younger than even the most junior of clerks. Other kids his age were finishing off their school studies and planning myriad possible futures. His had been mapped out along a pedestrian path by dumb fate, and he had Mr. Colloyd as a boss to boot. He tried to shake off the funk that had fallen onto him since leaving the castle, and headed into the bustling business of the market square. He could still feel his aunt's stare burning into his back, so he veered sharply right, weaving in amongst the stalls now overflowing with every kind of produce. He kept up his pace, chancing a peek over his shoulder once she was out of sight. Bam! Henry's normally fluid three-dimensional world was smashed into a two-dimensional sandwich. On one side, It's okay. Did the bam scare you? Oh, well, you can't get out. There you go. Bigger? Better? That's your food. Bam! Henry's normally fluid three-dimensional world was smashed into a two-dimensional sandwich. On one side, a large object he hadn't seen coming, due to the fact that he was looking in the other direction. On the other side, the rest of reality, which apparently had also not expected him to stop moving so suddenly. Several grocery-laden shoppers barreled into him, squeezing his slight body against the doughy surface he'd slammed into, before bouncing back in surprise, causing a ripple effect at least 10 shoppers deep. There were gasps and exclamations of pain as feet were trodden on, bags dropped, and somebody elbowed a pyramid of oranges, which went cascading across the pathway. Stunned by the blow, Henry slid to the floor like an unwanted pickle. His brain clamoured to regain control of the situation as it began to perceive certain sounds it recognised. The clatter of falling belongings, confused apologies and indignant protests. Feeling a little more confident, his brain decided to try out another sense. He opened his eyes and a large, round face swam into focus, out of focus, and then back into focus again. You all right, little fella, yeah? The face shrank away and was replaced by an oversized pair of hands. Henry blinked as his brain gave up trying to understand what was going on and settled instead for attempting to remember where it was. The hands reached down and grabbed him by the lapels, pulling him up to his feet and brushing his coat down roughly. Finally, the rest of the body belonging to the face and the hands swam into focus, and it appeared that Henry's observational abilities were fully restored. Thank you, was all his vocal section could muster. Henry sensed other hapless shoppers being pulled to their feet and dusted down, their strewn possessions smartly gathered up and poked into any available bag or large pocket to clear the path for other impatient shoppers. He stared as someone appeared with a broom and swept the river of tumbling oranges away. His cheeks prickled with guilt, and he turned his attention once more to the object he'd slammed into. The round-faced man was in his late 40s, and round was the most appropriate word to describe him. The benefactor, or victim, depending on your point of view, of many years of large second helpings, he had pink, chubby cheeks that were currently wearing a pink, chubby grin. He nodded affably and continued the rough valet with his large, round hands. Henry stepped back for fear of being knocked over again. He checked the side of his throbbing head for any signs of damage. The round man regarded him apprehensively.
"Sorry about that, little fella, but you did kind of charge into me a bit there. Sure you're okay, yeah?"
Henry nodded and instantly regretted it as his head spun. "Yes, I'm fine, thanks," he said, wobbling slightly.
"Oh, good,"
enthused the round man. He finished brushing off the worst of the dirt and gave the stunned accountant one last cautious look of appraisal, as if he half expected to see him slide to the floor again. Satisfied this wasn't the case, he thrust a piece of parchment into Henry's considerably smaller hand, patted him enthusiastically on the shoulder, and then turned and disappeared into the chattering crowd. Henry watched his large, round bottom get swallowed up by the press of people as he continued to push pieces of parchment into their hands. Henry looked down, bemused. "Are you stuck in a rut?" the flyer asked in ornate, curly handwriting. "Do you long for excitement and crave respect from your fellow man?" it inquired emphatically. "Bring the magic back into your life. Train for a new career as a sorcerer today," it impeached. Henry stared at the inoffensive piece of parchment as if it had just stuck out its tongue and blown a raspberry. He glanced about at the surrounding throng to see if anyone else had noticed. The throng seemed unconcerned and continued to shop, so he went back to the flyer in his hand. "You are invited to enroll on a course of 12 classes, which place the powers of magic and mystery right in the palm of your hand." Henry read on eagerly. "For an all-inclusive price of just 50 shekels, you could be mastering the art of magic and carving out a place for yourself in the annals of time as one of the greatest wizards ever to walk Earth. NB fortune-telling modules not included." Henry stood there agog. Here it was, his chance to learn about magic. But 50 shekels? He deflated further as he realised another stumbling block. There was no way his mother or Mr. Colloyd would let him take time off for the classes, even if he could afford them. He stared down at the flyer miserably and spotted a footnote. "This once-in-a-lifetime opportunity is brought to you by Gormandizing Enterprises, a member of the Council for Respectable Advancement of Speculative Sciences. Evening and weekend courses schedules on application, credit available, subject to status." Henry nearly whooped out loud. He clutched the slip of parchment to his belly, scanning the crowd again for any sign they were onto him. No one paid a blind bit of notice. Henry couldn't believe his luck. This was perfect. He could go to the evening classes and his family would be none the wiser. Once he had some magic, he could go off on a quest, do some impressive spell casting, maybe thwart a criminal mastermind or two, then pay off the debt with his rewards. They'd have to take him seriously then. Henry pulled himself reluctantly out of his daydream and stuffed the flyer deep into his pocket, skimming the market with his eyes in the hope of catching sight of the round man. As it seemed almost impossible that a man of such a size would not be spotted almost immediately if he were in the area, he quickly gave up looking. He resolved to fill out the application form that evening and walk it across town after supper to deliver it. He smiled to himself, but the smile wilted as some part of his shaken brain sparked the rumblings of uneasy recall. There was something he was supposed to be doing. With a zap, his brain circuits reconnected. Supper! I have to buy a chicken for supper. Oh, Mum is going to kill me if they've sold out. He turned on his heel and began fighting his way through the crowd towards his mother's favourite butcher, still grasping the amazing piece of parchment in his pocket. What a good day, he thought to himself as he trotted through the busy square, dodging left and right to avoid colliding with any more people. What a splendidly good day this was turning out to be. Chapter 3. Later that evening, as Henry sat at the kitchen table watching his family tuck into the hearty chicken dinner his mother had prepared, he contemplated the curious events of the day. He pushed small mounds of mashed potato through a sea of gravy with his fork, trying to disguise how little he'd eaten by rearranging the scenery. Will and Bill, his 9-year-old brothers, were arguing over the ownership of a snake skin they'd found on the way home from school. Their mother was beginning to look frayed around the edges. "Oh, for goodness sake, boys, can't you just share the thing nicely?" she said wearily. "Otherwise I shall have to ask Henry to throw it away, and neither of you will have it. Horrible, filthy bit of rubbish it is anyway." "Ha! He can try!" Will, the eldest of the pair by 3 whole minutes, glared at Henry insolently as he held the snakeskin aloft. Henry never understood why his mother dragged him into these disputes. The twins clearly had no respect for him, and in a couple of years they'd be bigger than him too, taking after his mother's more robustly built side of the family. Following his brother's lead, Bill poked his tongue out at Henry, and in that brief moment of united rebellion, the squabble over the snakeskin was forgotten. Henry ignored them as his mother started cleaning away the dishes. He learned long ago that reacting to their taunts was about as helpful as placing a steak sandwich on your head to divert the attention of a starving crocodile. They'd been just about bearable a few years ago, the usual annoying brother stuff, but when their father had vanished, they'd run a bit wild, constantly getting into trouble around town and running circles around Henry when their mother, too wrapped up in grief to deal with it, had tasked him with reprisals. Henry you getting excited? You're having a bounce. You're having a bounce. Bouncy bounce. Henry envied them sometimes as they'd seemed to bounce back so fast, hardly appearing to miss their father. He watched his mother transfer dirty plates from the table to the deep sink filling with hot sudsy water. She moved almost mechanically, shoulders dropped with an air of defeat that had settled on her like a cast-iron shawl as it became clear that her husband wasn't coming home. Henry shivered as ghosts from the past flitted through the shadows of the room. It had been about this time of night, right after supper, that the dreadful news had come. His father had headed off on a business trip that morning to buy exotic foods for the king from the port town of Amalga. Henry had been cleaning the dishes when his mother argued with the twins about finishing their greens. When there was a knock at the door, they all stopped and looked at each other, a thread of silent worry stretching out between them. No one ever called around at this time of night. Henry was jerked out of his reverie to find his mother peering into his face with anxious scepticism, a curious expression that only the mothers of exceptionally worrisome children can pull off with any real conviction. "You haven't done very well with your supper, Henry. Are you feeling ill?" "No, I'm fine, Mother," Henry fibbed, pushing a loaded forkful into his stiffly smiling mouth to prove it. The truth was, he did feel sick with anticipation, brought on by the slip of parchment tucked inside his pocket. He couldn't tell his mother that, though. She turned back to the dirty dishes. The mashed potato was almost cold, and Henry could feel rich onion gravy clinging to the sides of his throat as the unwanted food parcel, slid down into his stomach, arriving at its destination. She's having a bounce. Bouncy, 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 bouncy. The mashed potato was almost cold, and Henry could feel rich onion... Oh! She's trying to get the microphone. You want the microphone, do you? The mashed potato was almost cold, and Henry could feel rich onion gravy clinging to the sides of his throat as the unwanted food parcel slid down into his stomach. Arriving at its destination, it was churned up into an even more nauseous mess by the excited butterflies now swirling there. Henry didn't like lying to his mother, and the flyer burned guiltily against his left hip to remind him. He looked down at his overloaded plate. "He's probably suffering from some kind of brain embolism," said Will matter-of-factly. Well, at least he's paying attention to biology classes, Henry thought vaguely as he continued ignoring them resolutely. Frustrated by the lack of reaction, Will kicked him under the table. Bill sniggered into his hands. "Ow! Will, stop it!" "Ew, no, stop it!" mimicked Bill, flicking a pea across the table with while their mother's back was turned. The pea ricocheted off a spoon and hit Henry square on the chin, depositing a splodge of gravy before falling into his lap. He swiped crossly at his face as the twins broke into gales of laughter. Henry glared, and Will kicked again, harder this time. The toe of his boot connected painfully with Henry's shin as he leapt up from his seat, rubbing it. "No, ladies! Come, come away from the door. Hey, Wriggles! Wriggles! Here! Don't, no climbing. Come on, come here. Come here. Come on. Oh, hello. You want the book? Go in the back. Ah. At least I get an audible warning if she's climbing that fence, because there's no noise like it. Right, back to the book. Ow! Right, you leave it out right now, or I'm going to... Henry faltered. Or he would do what, exactly? Since his role as provider and head of the household didn't extend to him getting any respect from his brothers, and his mother was just too sad to notice their dissent, there wasn't a lot he could do. Suddenly enraged, Henry drove his fork into his own plate of food and catapulted a large wodge of cold potato right at Will's head. The older twin dodged left, barging into Bill, who tumbled off his chair with a cry of protest, and the airborne mash splattered messily on a portrait of Mrs. Flibbertigibbet hanging on the wall. "Henry!" The three of them stopped fighting and looked at their mother, who was standing over the table, fuming. "They started it," complained Henry, but his mother threw down her tea towel and put her hands on her hips, glaring. "You're supposed to be the responsible adult here. For goodness sake, Henry, you want me to run around doing everything for all of you, all on my own with no help. First you lose another 5 shekels of income we badly need, and now I have to clean up after a food fight too?" Her voice was shrill, eyes brimming with frustrated tears. All the boys' tempers blanched to see their mother's distress. "I'm sorry, I'll clean it." Henry made to reach for the tea towel, but his mother cuffed him on the side of the head, startling him back into his seat. "No, you won't. You will go to your room. I've had more than enough of you for just now." Will and Bill smirked at Henry, but their mother grabbed the tea towel herself and threw it across the table at them. "You two will clean up this mess, and you can finish the washing up too. I'm going to sit down and try to imagine I have 3 good, supportive sons instead of the monsters I see before me." Without another word, she slumped into the chair by the stove and buried her face in her hands. Will reached across to pull the tea towel off Bill's head where it had landed, glaring at Henry, who just sighed and headed for the stairs with a heavy heart. So much for being a responsible adult, he thought, sent to my room like a school kid. He climbed the stairs and pushed open the door to his tiny bedroom, heading straight for the battered old writing desk by the window. Swooping his arm across the cluttered wooden surface, he pressed the crumpled parchment flat onto the space he'd created. Settling himself on the edge of the bed, he read through the flyer. Again, it all seemed pretty straightforward. He read through the flyer again. It all seemed pretty straightforward. He must complete the application form on the reverse side, then deliver it to the corporate headquarters of Gormandizing Enterprises and await response. Henry scratched his details eagerly into the spaces provided, marked a heavy cross in the checkbox next to credit required. There. He sat back on the bed to admire his handiwork. Now he just had to deliver it. He looked at his closed bedroom door, chewing on his bottom lip. There was no way this side of the amalgam C his mother was going to let him go out tonight, so the smart move would be to drop it in after work tomorrow. He chewed harder on his lip, eyeing the filled-out parchment on the desk. Are you enjoying the story? Yes? Smart was dull. Smart had got him nothing but boredom and drudgery, with the occasional bout of murderous rage towards his annoying siblings. A different emotion started bubbling up, one he hadn't felt in years. Adventure. His gaze slipped to the window, and his eyes narrowed as they began to debate with his brain whether he could make it out and down into the garden safely or not. You read about people doing it in books all the time, his brain insisted. His eyes remained quietly cynical. Before any more parts of his body could add to the discussion, Henry snatched up the parchment and folded it roughly into his pocket. He'd never even thought of escaping through the window before, so was unsure what he'd see when he looked out with the critical eye of a fugitive. He pulled up the lever and the window creaked open, coughing a rim of dust from the seal that suggested it had been a long time since Henry had looked out of it with any kind of eyes. He waved the dust cloud away and peered down. A trellis supporting a sorry-looking yasmin vine was nailed to halfway up the front wall. He could probably swing his legs over the windowsill and lower his feet down onto the top of it with his elbows still on the ledge. He could test the strength of it at least. He'd still be able to climb back in if it felt too flimsy. His thoughts whirled, following dozens of possible scenarios to their end point as his heart beat faster and faster. I can always turn back, he breathed eventually, and began easing his bottom up onto the windowsill. Heart now hammering as if alarm bells were going off in his chest, he braced himself in the frame and swivelled his knees out through the small window. Despite his feet's severe reservations about their role... No! Despite his feet's severe reservations about their role in this stage of the plan, they had no choice but to follow. Right, okay, Henry said to himself, trying to sound confident. That's okay. Now, I just need to grab the hold of the window ledge. He moved as he talked, his body almost mechanically following his mouth's instructions, and slide myself around and down and oof! The wind had been knocked out of him as his... Are you alright? Are you okay? Did my oof scare you? Oh, it's okay. It's okay. You're too excited, aren't you? She needs to bounce. Oof. The wind had been knocked out of him as his knees left the safety of the ledge and his stomach took the full weight of his body from a height of about 12 inches. After a moment he stretched his toes forwards to find the wall, breathing hard. They scraped against the brick and he started slithering gradually down, feeling for the top of the trellis. His left foot found it first, and Henry sighed with relief to realise he still had enough leverage on the ledge to pull himself back in without too much trouble. Right. He gave the trellis an experimental rattle with his toes. It seemed fairly secure. He allowed himself to put a little weight on the structure. It continued holding gallantly to the wall, and Henry felt his confidence swell. He could do this. He could really do this. Sliding his body a bit lower, he began stepping his feet tentatively to the grid. down the grid work until he could let go of the ledge with one hand and grab the top of it. "There," he cried triumphantly, and remembered that he was supposed to be being stealthy and clamped his mouth shut. He felt like a burglar as he climbed hand over hand down the wooden frame. It was cool and dark outside. No one on the street, not an animal in earshot. He dropped the last few feet to the lawn and landed in a crouch with a grace that surprised even him, then turned and crept into the shadows at the edge of the garden, dragging a long string of bright white jasmine flowers from his ankle. Half an hour later, on the other side of town, Henry stood across the street from the Gormandizing Enterprises corporate headquarters with a sudden, inexplicable feeling of dread. He shuddered. His hands were slick with sweat, his heart still thumping in his chest after the excitement of the escape, followed by a brisk walk across town. Or was it thumping for another reason? He had an irresistible sensation that something dreadful was about to tap him on the shoulder and introduce itself. He checked over his shoulder, both shoulders, just to be sure, then took a shaky breath. "What's wrong with me?" he asked the knight with an embarrassed little laugh before lifting up one foot and pushing it towards the building, banking on forward momentum and gravity to take care of the rest. The interior of the building was plush and tastefully decorated. There were fine examples of art hanging from every marble-clad wall, and the floor glittered with a mosaic of delicately coloured tiling that Henry felt sure must drive the caretaker to distraction. A massive marble desk sprawled elegantly in the middle of the entrance hall, with a long-legged girl, a couple of years older than Henry, sprawling equally elegantly behind it. She was thumbing lethargically through a pile of parchments in her lap, so Henry cleared his throat politely to announce his arrival. The girl behind the desk looked up without much interest, and Henry felt his cheeks flush. What with working in the vault all day and only brothers at home, he didn't have much contact with girls, apart from his mother and Mrs. Flibbertigibbet, but he didn't think they counted as girls. Henry had no clue how to behave when he came to a girl at close quarters. "What you doing, Mrs.? Hey, hey, what you sniffing? Come on, Scruffles, Scruffles. Come on." "You need to play for a little bit. You need to jump, 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 jump." You just want to play, don't you? You want to play. Is your sister not playing with you? Where's she gone? Where's your sister gone? Why isn't she? There she is. There she is. She's going to play. No one. Hey. Come here. Ricky. Rick. Come here. Come on. Where are you going? You want to come and snuggle? Anyway. Trouble on a stick. Henry had no clue to behave when it came to a girl at close quarters. "Hey, want to come snuggle? Yeah. You want something super snuggly? Here's super snuggly. Here. She's just on a distracted thumb now. Henry had no clue how to behave when he came across a girl at close quarters. She looked from Henry's dumbfounded face to the slip of parchment in his hand, then back up to his unblinking eyes. "Put it in the tray marked in. We'll get back to you as soon as we've processed it," she recited in monotone, and then went back to thumbing through the parchment. Henry forced his feet to move further into the room and stretched his arm out until it was long enough to drop the application form into the tray she'd indicated. He tried desperately to think of something witty and intelligent to say, but it seemed like his brain was taking a break. He stammered. When it became obvious the power of speech had deserted him, Henry gave up, turning and scurrying towards the exit. He suddenly hoped that his application would be rejected so he'd never have to go through this humiliation again.
Hey, you!
The shout echoed around the foyer like a wolf's howl across an empty mountain. Henry froze in his tracks, torn between the twin urges to sprint for the exit or turn round to address the challenge.
Sorcerer's Apprentice or Practical Wizardry Grade 1?
Now that Henry had come to a complete halt, the voice had lost its edge of urgency, although it was still raised to a volume that suggested the owner was communicating from some distance. He turned and saw the round man from the market, leaning precariously over a high banister at the far end of the entrance hall. Henry blinked, and the round man repeated his question.
Sorcerer's Apprentice or Practical Wizardry Grade 1?
Henry recognised these options from the tick boxes on the form he'd filled out earlier.
Only if it's Sorcerer's Apprentice, you'd better get a move on or you'll miss your induction lecture.
Henry looked at the receptionist, expecting her to bark up at the round man about his application form not having been processed yet, but she continued her business without even registering a disturbance. Henry trotted over to the foot of the stairs beneath where the round man was standing. Sorcerer's Apprentice, I think.
You think? Got any previous experience of magic, yeah?
Henry thought briefly about his early morning chats with Halcyon and how the old man would occasionally ask him to collect herbs and minerals for use in his spells. He knew where practically every magical property in the kingdom could be found. He wondered if this could be classed as previous experience with magic.
What? Question too difficult? Come on, lad. Do you know any spells? Got a wand?
Henry's face, the face was still friendly, but the round man was clearly had better things to be doing than watching Henry's impression of a moonfish. No. He really would have to break out of the habit of beginning every sentence with He thought to himself crossly. "Come away from there, please. Hey! Wiggy! Wiggs! 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 Quick! Come on! Quick! Run! Quick! Stuff happening!" Squeak! 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 The face was still friendly, but the round man clearly had better things to be doing than watching Henry's impersonation of a moonfish. No. He really would have to break out the habit of beginning every single sentence with he thought to himself crossly.
Then Sorcerer's Apprentice it is, my little friend. Down the hall, take the second flight of stairs on the left to the third floor, then knock on the door marked D315, yeah? And try not to run into anyone on your way there.
The round man winked one heavily lidded eye at Henry and then disappeared back into the empty corridor behind him, chuckling to himself. Another glance at the girl behind the desk suggested she saw no problem with these instructions, so he jogged off down the corridor. Deeper into the building, the obvious signs of luxury began to disappear. Tasteful works of art were replaced by boldly printed signs issuing instructions about where to go, what to remember, and how to avoid the wrath of the gormandizing debt collectors by making sure your repayments were received on time. The butterflies started getting fidgety again. He slowed as he took in his surroundings. The intricately tiled ceramic floor was now made of simple slabs, well worn from the trampling of thousands of feet. At regular intervals on the left and right, starkly numbered wooden doors stood resolutely to attention. B105, B107, a set of stairs. Henry continued scanning the dim corridor for any signs of life. B109, B111, and the next door on this side of the corridor was labelled simply Conference A. As Henry approached the door, he noticed it was slightly ajar, and he could just make out the sound of muffled voices coming from inside. He drew closer and held his breath to hear what was being said. "The board of directors are extremely unhappy with you. I'm extremely unhappy. Do you understand?" The voice that spoke was thick with distaste. "This academy has been a severe drain on our bottom line for over a year now, and it's obvious to me that you've been more than a little creative with your bookkeeping. A fact I am sure Mr. Dysing would be most interested to hear." "My instructions come straight from the top. You can't threaten me." This voice was distressed, reduced to a squeak by the stranglehold of fear. But Henry would recognise that high nasally whine anywhere. Mr. Colloid. Mr. Colloid. He pressed himself against the wall and edged closer to the crack in the door, hoping to catch sight of whoever his employer was talking to. The other voice was coming from behind a high-backed leather chair. The only sight of its inhabitant from where Henry lurked was a curl of grey smoke drifting up from the tip of a cigar rested on one arm. "I'm on to you, Colloid. Do you hear me? It's not a game, you know. This is serious business, and your books seem to be more a work of fiction lately." The menacing voice seemed to coil itself around Mr. Colloid's throat, squeezing until the accountant's face turned beetroot. He struggled visibly to assert some authority. But my instructions were quite clear. Mr. Dysing said..." "Mr. Dysing said?" Colloid recoiled like a snake as the hidden man roared at him. "I don't care what you think Mr. Dysing said. Since he never shows his face around here, I only have your word for it, and I don't take the word of worms. If you're so pally with a big mysterious boss, why don't you roll him out here to back you up, eh?" Mr. Colloid continued to cower through an unimpressive attempt to straighten up confidently. Since you're on the board of directors," he retorted such unsteadily, "why don't you roll Mr. Dysing out here to challenge me?" The unseen man gripped the arms of the chair, and the whole thing shook with the force of his rage. "Get out, Colloid! Get out!" Henry's body went rigid. Mr. Colloid was about to leave the boardroom. Henry didn't know the full story, but it was clear that he was moonlighting for Gormandizing Enterprises. Henry was also pretty sure it wouldn't go well for him if he was caught out here snooping on his boss. Seeing the accountant stoop to collect his ledgers from the table, Henry took his chance and dashed across the gap in the door, holding his breath in anticipation of an angry shout. He bolted down the corridor, rounding the corner onto the second set of stairs just in time to avoid being spotted by the hastily departing accountant. So, Mr. Colloid had been fiddling the books at this big, impressive corporation. What a scandal that would cause if it got out. He smiled to himself as he scaled the stairs to the third floor and began searching for the door marked D315. No! No! All right, you're okay. Gently. Stop it! She's too excited. Come in. Come on, relax. Wear yourselves out. This is like extreme story reading. Shall I continue? I can't see chat very well, so just put. She got hungry suddenly. I tell you what, I can check chat on here and see if anyone's interested in hearing more, or if you've had enough and just want to watch the ferrets play. Hello, cheeky. Hello. Are you going to help me? Are you going to help me? It's not very helpful. It's not massively helpful. No, definitely not massively helpful. Don't bite me. Don't bite.
Blind, we can play games.
Oh my god, this is the cutest.
The moon.
That is Hello, it's Colo.
To the moon.
Come and see Hello, it's Colo.
Should we play a game?
Hello, it's Colo streaming. Come and
I
see.
actually gave every character other styles of music. George is mostly in the styles of the Beatles, he's British. Right. George Washington has the best songs and potentially unpopular opinion. I think that he has.
She's inside it.
It's when he goes.
Do you
it's
like
at
that?
the end of, it's at the end of
Colo, I think you have a new fan.
It's at the end of that, and he does this, like, he steps into the middle of the stage and he's like, and it's like all over his face, and I'm like, oh my god, that talent, that like, he's an exceptional actor. He's got an exceptional voice. Just what a dude! Like, honestly.
Do you like Colo?
Underrated.
No biting.
And
Is it?
I don't know what else to
Are you
say.
overstimulated? Oh,
I don't know
no.
what else to say. Oh, no, Washington. Oh,
No.
Got it, Misha. I thought that you meant George Washington.
Can be nice.
George Washington. Hey, Sybil.
You are.
Hi, Black Dragon. It's the difference between African and Europeans. One of those things they migrate between the two continents today, I learned.
I'm going to have to turn you off, Colo. You're getting my ferret too excited.
Something like that. Oh, go on. Something like that. Hey, Philip. Hiya.
Someone go and tell Colo to come and watch. No. She's just going to start playing.
Okay.
Right. Let me get rid of this. I'll see what your chats are. Come on then, Trouble. Do you want to come and settle down? Come here. Come here. Come and settle. Okay, I can see right now. I can see chat. So do you guys want no no. Psst. No. Be gentle. She got overstimulated by Colo. Come on then. Are you hungry? Are you looking for your foods? Here. A bite back. No, that's not the answer. Oh yes, the good news. So, I'm so excited by this. I just before I started broadcasting today at 2 p.m, I remembered that I wanted to check the ferret's date of birth so that we could put that in. And you'll never guess what date of birth they have. See if you can guess. Exactly, Playpy. 22nd of May. Go figure. So we only have to do one birthday party every year, which is good. Let's see if we can get them to come and snuggle now. So do you want to hear more of the book, or have you guys had enough? If you had enough Bookkeeper's Guide for one night, let me know. Yeah, I need to stock up. No Cosmos for the kits. Virgin Cosmos. Birds. Birds. These hungry girls. I'm okay. I could go. If people want to hear it, but if people don't want to hear it, I can pack up. I need to clear their litter tray still. How long is the next chapter? Oh, the next chapter is quite long actually. Oh yeah, I'm sorry that you had to do that, Playpy, but I'm glad you had a nice it's alright. Can you come and be nice? Come on then. Is she gonna be friendly? Meh. Be nice. No. Kss. Be nice. No biting. Do you understand me? No biting. Okay? I am the boss. I am the boss. No. No. Good girl. Good girl. Right. You are going into timeout. Oh, damn, the timeout box isn't there. No more out. Naughty girl. She's still very nippy. So I guess they'll go to sleep soon. They'll probably get, and then I'll clean out their litter when they go to sleep. So I guess I'm going to stop there. No, you get no treats. You get no treats. You're a bad girl. Yeah, I think I'll leave it for tonight. One cake to rule them all. Bad kitty, I know. So, yeah. I guess what I'll do is I'll just sort of like clear up down here. I'll put the view back on the kits. And I'll clear up down here. And I'll go and come and have a chat with you. And when they've gone, I'll go and come and have a chat with you. And when they've gone to sleep, I'll clean their litter.